Okay, we're back from break on assignment E. We've done the grids. Now we're ready to place columns. And then we're going to put footings under those columns, a pad footing. And then we're going to put a beam, a steel beam across the top. So we'll start with the columns. And I want to mention the fact that when you place a column, you normally want to have a column grid already there. So we'll go to, let's see if we have any structural columns loaded here. So I'm going to go down in my browser, collapse the things I don't need to see. Windows I'm done with. So I look for structural columns. And you'll see there's a family called pipe column. And it's pipe 4, schedule 40, and pipe 6, schedule 80. They used to size structural pipe columns by a schedule 40, schedule 80 system. Now they've renamed how they name those in the steel manual. And so they're called pipe extra strong or standard. So in the handout here, we want to load one called pipe 4XS. But the family is already there. It's just the type isn't there. So the way structural shapes work a lot of times is you'll have one family. It's just a round pipe, but it has all these various diameters. And the same with wide flange beam sections or columns. You've got W10 by something, W12 by something, W14, W16, and all these. There's probably hundreds, a couple hundred or more shapes. So when you load one of those families, you don't want all those types to be listed in your browser because you may never use the rest of them. So the way Revit allows us to do that is when you go Insert, Load Family, and we go to, now for structural stuff, you don't need to go to My Library. They're just in the out of the box. That's one thing that what Autodesk gives you is already built well, is the structural stuff. So we go to Structural, and then Columns, and then Steel. And then we highlight the pipe column family. Now because there's so many types, this is set up so there's pipe column.rfa, and if you were to look in Windows, there's a pipe column.txt file that just lists all the various types out of the steel manual. And Revit finds that other little text file, even though you won't see it when you're loading here. And when you hit open, it brings up what's called a types table. And this types table lists all the various types for that family. So I want pipe 4XS. I just did the insert load family. Structural, columns, steel, pipe column. So I'm really reloading the same family to get more types. And so I go down the list. I'm going to do the pipe 4XS. I'm going to go ahead and load one or two others just for fun. So I'll do pipe 4 standard and the pipe 6XS. And these numbers you would find if you opened up a steel manual. It's the square footage area, it's the outside diameter, inside diameter, thickness of the wall, and all that stuff. Now because we already had that family in our project, Revit, in order to load additional types, I have to tell it I'm overwriting it. Even though I didn't change how the family was built, I just want to add more types to it. So I'm not really overwriting it, I'm just adding types, but I have to answer this first question in order to write over it. Now if I go to pipe column, I see the ones I've loaded. And really those schedule 40 and 80 ones are outdated types that aren't even in the library anymore, so I'm going to just delete those to avoid confusion. And then I'm ready to place my column. So I could go to Home, Column, where are you? Right there. And the one that looks like a simple round column is the structural version. The one that looks like a simple kind of Doric Greek column is the architectural column. So this button actually has both. If you go to Structure, the column button has both, but it's always going to default to the structural column. Now I think in 2013, you only have structural column on the structural menu. You can't get to the architectural column from there, which makes sense. Why would you go to Structure to place an architectural column? So you can use either button. As long as you go to the structural column, then I look for the pipe 4XS, not to be confused with the group in XS. And when you place a column at a grid intersection, when you hover near where they intersect, make sure both of the two grids light up in blue before you click. And before I place it, I want to check the height, and it says height up to the first floor, and we'll start with that. So there's a pipe column, and there's a pipe column. Now let's look at our building in 3D here. And remember our friend the section box, let's turn him on, which is in our view properties under here. And then I'm going to cut off the upper half, upper portion of the building, so I can see into the basement. There's our pipe columns. So now I want to pay more attention to where the bottom of the column is, because right now I just defaulted to start at the basement because I was at a level 0 view. And columns are very similar to walls in terms of they have a base level and a base offset. So rather than starting the base of the column at the basement floor level, I'm going to pick them both and say the base level should be top of footing. And that way they poke through the slab and they sit where the footings are down below. And we'll worry about the top of the columns later. For now they're just going up to the first floor and they're stopping right at the surface. We'll put a beam in there and attach them to the other side of the beam. So now if we go back to our plan, we can't see footings in the basement plan, but if we go to the other plan we made back in assignment B, top of footing, that view we can actually see the footings. We're looking deep enough. There's our slab, there's our footings on the wall footings, so now we need pad footings for the columns. So let's go to structure, foundation, and we want isolated, which is a pad footing. And now this type of foundation you have to load a family, and there aren't any already in our project, so I say yes, I want to load a structural foundation family. Then I go to structural foundations, footing rectangular, and I open to load it. And then I said we want to use a 48 by 48 by 12, which we will not find, so you make your own type. Hopefully by now you're getting used to this. You say edit, duplicate the type, and I'm going to call this 48 inch by 48 inch by 12 inch, and OK. Then I'm going to come down here to properties and change the length to 4 feet and the thickness to 1 foot, and OK. Now because I'm at the top of footing level, this view is leveled at the top of footing. The host of the footing is going to be at that same level. So I just wait until the grids light up and click it there. Wait until the grids light up and click it there. Now it's not showing up because I've got a slab in the way, but if this were a foundation plan, I would want to dash in the outline of the footing below the slab so I could temporarily change the view to wireframe. And then there's a little tool, and I don't put this in the handout, so I don't require you to do this, but I wanted to share this with you. I can go into the Modify tab, and there's a button right here that's called Line Work. That allows you to override the way certain edges of things look. So if I go in here while I can see it, because I've got see-through mode, wireframe, pick it and say I want to use hidden with the little carrots around it as my line style. And then I can pick the edges of the wall footings, all 4 of them, and the outside of each of those footings here. And so it changes how each of those lines look. And then I escape and I go back to hidden line, and so they stay that way. Even though now I'm back to hidden line mode, it makes it look like the way you would want to draw a foundation plan. But if I go back to the level 0 existing plan, I won't see them because this is an architectural basement plan, not a structural footing plan. So if I go back to 3D, there's my footings. And one more trick I just want to show you here. I'm going to cut into things with my section box for a minute. There's my footings. You can see how the columns are coming down to sit on them. Now, if I take one of those columns and I say, let's put the base level of the column -2 feet below the top of footing level, and I apply that, I get this message. It says an attached structural foundation will be moved to the bottom of the column. So if I stretch the bottom of the column down, the footing has to go with it because it knows that footing has been attached to the bottom of the column. So it's smart in that respect. So when the column drops, the footing drops. Same for this one. If I said, let's drop that -5 feet, I get the message and say, okay. And now I'm actually below my section box here, so I'm going to lower that. But in this case, I don't really want to do that. I was just kind of demonstrating. So I'm going to set the base offset to 0. And it moves them both back up. Okay, so that's pipe columns and pad footings, or as it calls them, isolated footings. So now we're ready to do the beam. Okay, we're going to go to the work level 1 existing architectural view here, the plan. Now, we're going to put this beam on column grid line A, and it's going to go from one wall all the way across both columns to the other wall. And I don't think I said this in the handout, but let's take that wall and hide it with the sunglasses. Hide just that element. So now we can see, and this is a door here, a cased opening. I'm going to hide that as well. Sunglasses is a temporary hide isolate. So then when we reset it, everything's back to normal. Okay, and the way you place beams is you say, I want to be at the right floor level for the top of the floor that beam supports. So I want to be at a first floor plan, even though these beams go under the floor, so they're kind of like in the ceiling space of the basement. And then I go to structure, beam, and there's no tag loaded. I don't want to load a tag, but I want to make sure I have a wide flange beam, which is a W 8x35, and I don't. So you might have noticed, you might not have, when you go into a command to place something and you don't have the right one, you don't even have to escape out of the command and go to insert and load family. Usually it'll give you a load family button while you're in the middle of trying to place beams in this case. So I can go straight to load family, and I go to structural framing, which is horizontal beams and girders and things. Go to steel. And so this is a wide flange beam as opposed to a wide flange column. They're the same shapes out of the steel manual, but it's only at the horizontal instead of vertically. So when I hit open, again, I get this types table, like I did for the pipe columns. And I want to load the W 8x35, which is almost to the bottom of the list. It's one of the smallest sections. And just for good measure, I'm going to load one or two others, so I just have something to choose from here. So now, because I went straight to the load button right in the command, I'm still in the beam command. Now, if I look on my my properties palette here, I'm just going to be building this beam right at the floor, and then I'm going to turn around and drop it when I'm done. So if you click right on the grid there, go up and click on the wall there. I did it 10x30, didn't I? Yeah, and I didn't need that much structural capacity. So I'm just going to undo that. I'm still in the command though, so then I can pick the right type. You guys, I can't get anything past you tonight. That's good. And then I'll start there and go up to here. Now it's telling me that that's not visible. Well, probably it's because the floor is obscuring it. So let's try going to wireframe. And it's still not visible. So now the next issue might be that our view range needs to look just a little bit deeper before we can see it. So I'm going to go to view range, which is down here in my view properties. And let's offset negative a foot for both of these lower two settings. And there's my beam. And when you're in fine level of detail, you see the flange out here and the web of the beam, which is the middle section of the eye shape. And I've got the column grid. But because I'm in wireframe, I'm seeing everything. If I go to hidden line, then it shows dashed lines for the web because it's kind of hidden underneath the flange. I just dropped it negative 1 foot for the lower two.
The bottom and the level?
Bottom and the view depth level. What Revit will not let you do is lower the bottom below the view depth. It gives you an angry message. So I just usually drop both of them. Really? Yeah. And what happens is, if I say that's a structural bearing wall, which I haven't yet, and if I select that wall and say, let's make it structural, and let's make it bearing, then Revit wants to tie in the end of the beam right into the wall like it's shown there. And so if I was to take this into Revit structure and analyze the forces, it's going to recognize that that beam is carrying a load and it's bearing on either end of those two walls. And we actually, you don't have to. It would only show up if you set up a structural framing plan, which I don't really have you do. But I may do another workshop where I get into Revit structure a little bit more, and I'll talk more about it maybe in the next few months. Now, let's look at it in 3D. And I have my section box turned on, so I'm going to pull it up a little bit. And I'm going to pull it in a little bit. So this is kind of a weird looking view. I've got my column going all the way up to the floor level. And I've got my beam sitting right at the floor level, which the top of the flange is at that level. So I need to make a couple of adjustments here, but I'm going to worry about the pipe columns after I get the beam right. So if you look at the handout, there's a little view here that shows two different details. I've got one, and I'm giving you a choice. You have to do one or the other. There's not really, you have to pick one later. But if you do the version where the beam is below the wood floor, then you can complete a detail that looks like this little detail here and get extra credit for that. So I'm going to go through the steps on that. It doesn't all show up in the handout here, but what we're going to do is make sure we have a section cut crossways through the building looking north or south. So for that I'm going to go back to my plan, and here's a section. Let's use that. Well, no, that's, yeah, it's just south of the column, so that'd be good. I'm going to double click that. So here's a building section. It's fine level of detail. It's a 3/4 inch scale, which is a good scale to be able to see some detail here. And there's my beam right at the surface. And you can't see it, but the column is running right on up through too. So the two ways we can do this, and if you think about how basements and the framing in old houses are built, that beam could actually be below the wood joist, which is just this gray kind of mass here, and it could be supporting those joists. Or if you're worried about head clearance, like that door there that I said, you know, we may have problems getting enough room for the door head height. So if you don't want to create a conflict with that door, you will do the choice where we just lower the beam enough to get it below the wood floor and the subfloor. So we go into the start and end level offset values, and we'll do negative 1.5 because it's 2 layers of 3/4 inch. And I'm going to do that one, copy and paste it into there and apply it. Now if you just do start or end but not both, you're going to end up with a beam that slopes from one end down to the other. And you're going to see a little bit of three-dimensional stuff going on there. So make sure you do them both at negative 1.5. And I think my handout shows that start and end level offsets to negative 1.5. Now, if you do the other one where you have the beam shown, let me blow that up here. If you do this little detail, you're actually going to set the top of steel 1.25 down so we have room to get a 2x6 piece of wood blocking to sit on the steel. So then in turn these joists bear on that blocking and you have the structure, and it's much easier for a framer to build that, but it means we've got encroachment in the ceiling space of our head height of the door. So where do we go from here? Well, let's go ahead and blow that detail up. And let's do the alternative scheme, which is, now when you blow up, I'm in a section, if I want to blow up a detail from it, you go to the View tab, where you have Create, and we do what's called a callout. The callout is like an enlargement from one view to a larger scale detail of it. So if you hit callout, you have a choice of, if I'm looking at a building section, I can blow up a wall section, like circle up a whole wall, or I can blow up one detail. If I start out with building section of a building section, I can do half of it and then change it to a wall section. But you have to decide if it's a detail or not in the beginning. So I'm going to say detail. And then you can pick what scale the detail will be at, which I believe 1.5 inches equals a foot is correct. I can't remember if I showed that here. So I'm going to leave that, and then I'm going to do my two opposite corners of the detail here. And so you get the little dashed box, and then you can grab that little label and pull it around to whatever corner you want. Now if you double click that blue head of the label, there is my detail. And I'm going to change that to hidden line. Now, in a building section, you like to be able to see what's beyond. And I can see, okay, there's that door in the distance, there's the stone wall in the distance, there's that other door. But when you blow up a detail, usually you don't want to look that deep, you want to just concentrate on what's right in front of you. So when you do that, Revit allows you to say, okay, the depth of this view is going to be shallower than the one it was bubbled off of. And that's called its parent view. So if you scroll down here, you'll see there's a property in the view that says view depth, I'm sorry, where is it? Far clip settings. Same as parent view means you're going to be looking just as deep as the building section that I bubbled it on. If I say instead I want it independent, then I can come into the far clip offset and I'm going to say I'm only going to look about 3 feet in the distance, so I see the column but nothing beyond the column. So I'll say 3 feet and hit enter. So now I'm seeing my structural column and my wall above. No, that's the door. What is that? That's the frame of a door upstairs, which isn't really important to me, but the thing I did want to see the column, so I can see that beyond. And so then I'm going to go ahead and do the other detail where I drop that down -1 foot 0.25. So I do that for the start and end level offsets. So now my beam is set up below the framing of the joists. And now, when you do a detail in Revit, there's some things that you just don't need to build in 3D. Like a piece of wood blocking, you don't have to build a 3-dimensional horizontal board for that because it's just more detail than you need in 3D. And you have to make decisions like that when you're building Revit, because otherwise you could get so caught up in building every last little thing that you spend a whole lot more time than you need, especially if your job is to be the architect and put out a set of drawings for the contractor to build from. He doesn't need to see every little detail, especially if it takes you more time. So we'll just stick a flat representation of a stud on there, and that's quicker and easier. And those things are called detail components. So remember how annotation is just on one view stuck on the glass, so to speak. And so if I put dimensions on here, they only show up in this view. If I put tags, like a door tag, it'll only show up in that one view. Well, detailing is another kind of similar thing to annotations in that you're just drawing objects that are flat right on the glass. And so a detail line and a filled region where you can hatch it are, not like a hatchet, but hatch it. Those are two kinds of detailing, and then there are detail components, which are pre-built Revit families that you can build yourself or use from the library that you just stick on. And that's what we're going to do for that 2x6. So we go and look in our browser under detail items, and you see an anchor bolt and a few other things, dimension lumber section. So that's already been loaded. So we'll grab the 2x6 and we'll drag it out on the screen. And it's in your browser under the families, detail items. Dimension lumber section is the family, and 2x6 is the type I'm going to use. So there's a 2x8, 2x6, and 2x4. Oh, yeah. I should clean those out. Good point. I'm just going to delete some duplicates. No, they just got named differently. Good catch. You guys are catching all kinds of things tonight. That's good. So I'm going to drag the 2x6 out here. Now, if you spacebar, it'll rotate 90 degrees at a time. So I'm going to rotate it around so that I'm placing the corner flush with the bottom of the floor. And then I'll skip out of it. Now, that thing should not be transparent like it is. So we can try insert load family and go out and see if there's a better one under detail components, which would be under division 6 wood and plastic, wood framing, nominal cut lumber in section. So I think the dimensional lumber was an older version from Revit 2008 or 7 or something that I had in this little file. So it'd be better if we load the newer one, because I believe the newer one, and we'll pick again for the type tables, 2x4s, 2x6s, should be able to hold control if I can hit the right key here. And a 1x6 and a 1x4, just in case I need this. So I'm going to change that to the one I just loaded, which is nominal cut lumber in section 2x6. And that one's much better. It's heavy on the outside and it's opaque. So now I could align it, AL, to the grid line. Is there not a center line in that? Come on. I'll just move it then from that intersection over to the grid. So see how that covers up what you see beyond. Now, the last thing I want to do is fix, well, I'll put a dimension in here to finish that detail. There's my 1 foot 0 1/4. And then I don't think I put this in the handout, but if you want to do this detail and get extra credit, you should put like a little note in here, and that'd be on annotate text. And once you go into the text command, you can do 2-segment leader, 1-segment leader, an arc leader, or just text without any leader. So I use the 2-segment leader. And then I can point to that and say 2 by, I'm trying to do the text. Type outside of the box, not figuratively but literally, you'll notice that the crop region has an outer box, and that's called the annotative crop. So the inner one is what cuts the building elements, the model elements off. But the text can spill out of that as long as it doesn't go outside that outer one. So if I move my text out there, it just vaporizes, which I like the concept, but I don't like the way it just vaporizes. And the only way to get it back and to even realize it's there is to select the crop region and pull the annotative crop out further. There it is. So beware the annotative crop region. You can actually turn it off if you go into the properties of the view here and uncheck annotative crop. And then the text and dimensions and annotations can spill out as far as you want to beyond the actual crop region. Now when you're doing a detail, you normally don't want to see that crop box actually drawn in, so you hit this little button that says Hide Crop Region. And then just to kind of finish this off, you might want to put a little break symbol on either end of the floor there. And that's a detail component. Now this time I'm going to actually go to the ribbon where it says Annotate Component, Detail Component. And I'm going to select the break symbol, break line. And I can bar. The way the break line works is it masks what's on one side of it. So it kind of is the way you would draw it by hand. I like to stretch the little jog so that it's a little bit more dramatic looking. And then once I've got that one, I usually rotate and make a copy 180 degrees. So I place my center on the column grid and say, let's go 180 that way. So there's my other break symbol. And that looks like a finished detail. But we have one more task to do. These columns shouldn't go all the way up through the floor. So I'm going to go back to my 3D view. I'm going to take a look at that beam and see how the columns run right on up through the beam. Remember our attached top base for walls? It works for columns as well. So I can select both of those columns, look for the attached top base button, and then I can hit the beam, and it attaches the top of the pipe columns to the other side of the beam. So if I look at this, it says the top offset is, and it's measuring it now based on where it stopped at the beam, -1 foot 8 and 95/256. Well, believe it or not, wide flange shapes like that beam, structural framing, if I look at the W8 by 35, those are really the dimensions that come out of the steel manual because they roll these sections to very precise thicknesses for structural capacity. But thank goodness you never have to type that number in there. You just let it attach itself and you're done. So that's the end of the regular part of assignment E. Save what I have, save the recording, session 5.